This story, it really begins with a chilling, everyday quiet. 4 students were found they didn't make it in their own beds. But the call to 911 didn't come for 8 hours. The most chilling part is that 2 roommates survived. One of them saw a man in a mask leaving. She just locked her door, not knowing the tragedy had already taken place. When you learn who was responsible, how they were found, you'll understand the chilling, calculated nature of this plan. Welcome to the channel. This is Tom. We're not going to draw this out. Just write, what city are you from? What time is it for you right now? What's the weather like? Also, what are you eating or drinking right now? In the small town of Moscow, Idaho, yep, there's a Moscow, Idaho, the morning of November 13th, 2022, started completely normal. It always starts that way, doesn't it? Quiet, cold, a thin layer of fog over the University of Idaho campus. You know, the kind of picture you'd expect to see in a college brochure, not at the beginning of a tragic story. Everything felt familiar, frozen in routine, like time had sort of forgotten this place. Then, at 11:58 a.m., almost noon, imagine that, the routine just cracked. A call to 911 from the residents at 1122 King Road. The caller, one of the survivors, said something about an unconscious person. How wrong they were about the scale of it. Unconscious. What police found when they arrived, it really defies simple description. It was a typical college house, 1122 King Road. Slightly peeling walls, old stairs, no doubt a history of loud parties, spilled beer. Nothing made it different from hundreds of others. Until that night. The night it turned into the setting for one of the most high-profile, most disturbing crimes in modern American history. 4 young people were found. They hadn't survived. Not a shooting, not an accident. They were all attacked. The most chilling part, there were no signs of forced entry, meaning the person responsible either walked right in, or they let him in, or was he already there? Witnesses? Well, there were almost none. The victims were Kaylee Gonfalves, Madison Mogan, best friends, inseparable since childhood, who shared a room on the top floor. On the floor below, Ethan Chapin, his girlfriend Zana Carnadal. Ethan was just visiting her that night. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the most tragic way possible. But 2 other roommates survived. This is where it just gets chilling. One of them, it was later revealed, came out of her room in the middle of the night, saw a man in a mask leaving for the exit. She just saw him. He probably saw her too. At that moment, she didn't realize the full scale of what was happening. She just locked herself inside. But police were only called the next morning when the victims were found. Imagine the feeling, being in the same house for hours with what happened. Later, medical examiners determined the attacks happened in a narrow window between 4 a.m., 4:25 a.m. 25 minutes for 4 lives. The attacks were carried out with a large, sharp instrument. The perpetrator acted quickly, almost silently, with a kind of professional detachment. This wasn't a fight. No screams were heard. No one even had a chance to try to get away. Investigators immediately concluded this was a deliberate, methodical act, not a spontaneous burst of rage, not a tragic accident. It was a mission. The town, the university, soon the entire country weren't just shocked. They were paralyzed. Social media, of course, just exploded. Photos of the smiling victims, TikTok videos of their carefree lives, countless Instagram reposts. People were desperate for answers, while the police were struggling to find anything. For the first few weeks, almost nothing. Zero. No weapon, no fingerprints, no obvious motive. Media headlines became more dramatic. The invisible attacker. Tragedy in the silence. The Idaho nightmare. The police were under unprecedented pressure, but they had nothing to say. No suspects. Then, the internet detectives stepped onto the scene. Theories multiplied. An unknown stranger, a jilted ex-boyfriend, an unstable fanatic. The victim's parents, desperate, couldn't wait. They started their own campaigns, made pleas, spoke out publicly. Kaylee Goncalves' family was especially vocal. Her father, taking his case nationwide, demanded justice with a fierce, almost raw passion. But the real turning point only came a month and a half later. While the public, the TikTok detectives, were looking in one place, police were silently working in another. Dozens of surveillance videos, cell tower data, behavioral profiles. Then, on December 29th, 2022, all the way in Pennsylvania, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in the middle of the night. Who was he? A PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. The irony is sickening. Before that day, his name was unknown to anyone. None of the victims knew him personally. However, the details that emerged after his arrest sent a chill through even the most hardened observers. Bryan, you see, was enrolled in a program dedicated to criminal behavior. He was literally studying serial offenders. He had authored research papers on the psychology of criminal acts. He participated in online discussions, debates on forums about how emotions affect victim selection. This isn't just a coincidence. It's like a script. The cherry on top, shortly before the attacks, he posted a survey on Reddit. You know what he was asking former convicts? What they felt at the moment they committed their offense. He wasn't just studying, he was, it seems, collecting feedback. The purpose of gathering that information became tragically clear far too late. The investigation showed his Hyundai Elantra was spotted near the victim's home on the night of the attacks. According to cell phone records, his phone was turned off during the exact time frame that matched the attack. Classic. But here's where he slipped up. In the trash collected from his parents' home in Pennsylvania, DNA evidence was recovered. It matched evidence found on a knife sheath, a sheath he apparently left behind at the scene by mistake. There's always one little thing, right? Of course, Kohberger insisted on his innocence. His lawyers immediately started playing the game. The evidence was circumstantial, coincidental, or even planted. Standard tactics when you're caught. But more evidence pointed elsewhere. His digital footprint, his strange behavior after the crime, his attempts to cover his movements, it all pointed to one very clear conclusion. He planned this. He watched his targets, he chose his moment, he thought he knew exactly how to get away with it. The court proceedings took over a year. This wasn't just preparation. It was gearing up for war. The prosecution built its case on the damning evidence, what they believed were clear motives. The defense, on the other hand, played on ambiguity, pressing on possible investigative errors, the frantic media pressure. The victim's parents sat silently in the courtroom, while reporters recounted every emotion, every word, day after day. In June 2024, after months of preparation, Bryan Kohberger appeared in court. The hearings went on for weeks. Eyewitness testimony, forensic experts, digital analysts, it all formed a chilling mosaic. By July 2025, it was clear the prosecutors were not playing. They would be seeking the death penalty. The story that began in the quiet pre-dawn hours in Idaho reached its climax in the courtroom filled with cameras, tears, a tension so thick you could, well, you know. Questions, of course, still swirled. Why did he do it? Why choose these specific people? Why with such cold academic precision? There may never be answers that truly satisfy, but one truth became undeniable. Evil can have any face. Sometimes it wears a mask. Sometimes it wears the glasses of a PhD student studying crime, supposedly trying to understand it, or maybe trying to get better at it. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, they had been inseparable since the 6th grade. Their friendship survived all those teenage crises, proms, first loves, moving. They were like sisters, sharing clothes, secrets, dreams. Madison was quiet, thoughtful, with a slight rasp in her voice, while Kaylee was vibrant, loud, charismatic, the life of the party. Both were students at the University of Idaho. Madison was studying marketing, but Kaylee, you know what? Criminology. Just one more brutal, ironic twist when you look back.
Just her laughter. Her sense of humor was amazing. She was very funny. I miss her smile. I miss
Zana Kernodle, she was relatively new to this shared house, but they say she quickly became friends with the girls. She came from a humble background, studied design, worked part-time, a classic student story, dreaming of moving to a big city. Ethan Chapin, her boyfriend, he was her complete opposite. Bright, from a big family, just, kind-hearted, naively confident that everything would somehow work out. Because for him, it probably always had. He was a student in the sports department, played volleyball, competed for the university team. They were a couple that seemed to complete each other. On the evening of November 12th, everything seemed absolutely routine. This was the last night of their lives, but they, of course, didn't know that. Each pair had their own plans. Kaylee, Madison, the inseparable friends, went out to a bar on the corner. They sat at the counter, laughing, posting stories on social media, those digital footprints that, in less than a day, would be studied under a microscope. Around 1:30 a.m., they left the bar, walked over to a nearby food truck, chatting with other students, grabbing a bite. They were captured on a surveillance camera. They looked a little drunk, but happy, a normal Saturday. At 1:56 a.m., they got into a car called through a university-sponsored ride service, basically a free student shuttle to get home safe. The driver later confirmed nothing unusual about their behavior. Meanwhile, Ethan, Zana, they spent the evening at a party in a neighboring house. They left shortly before 2 a.m. Everyone was heading home. The house they all lived in had 3 floors. This is important for understanding the logistics of the tragedy. Ethan, Zana, they were on the 2nd floor, while Madison Kaylee had rooms on the 3rd. But in the basement lived 2 other girls who, by some absolutely unbelievable, tragic turn of fate, survived that night. They slept while, just floors above them, the tragedy unfolded. The night was quiet. The town was asleep. There was no traffic on King Road, no noise. Then, at 3:26 a.m., surveillance cameras pick him up. A white Hyundai Elantra, driving slowly past the house. Not just passing, it's circling the neighborhood, repeatedly. The driver is scouting, studying, choosing the moment. At 4:04 a.m., the car appears again. Then it's gone. From this moment, there's silence. Investigators would later determine the attacks began around 4 a.m. Zana, Ethan, on the 2nd floor, they were first. Then the attacker moved up to the 3rd, to Madison, Kaylee. All the victims were attacked in their sleep or just as they were waking up. The examination showed that only one victim, Ethan, had struggled. Maybe he woke up, maybe he tried to protect Zana. The others just didn't have a chance to defend themselves. The attack was fast, deliberate, methodical. There's one detail that is unsettling. One of the victims was harmed even after she was gone. This shows the attacker was in control, he wasn't rushing, he knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't panic, it was a ritual. This is where he makes a mistake. On a knife sheath found near Madison, a trace of DNA was discovered. At the time, no one knew whose it was, but this tiny detail, this single skin cell, would later become the turning point in the investigation. Around 4:20 a.m., a nearby security camera picks up the sound of tires screeching, likely the same Hyundai Elantra, speeding away. Later, another camera captures a white sedan at 4:48 a.m., heading south on Highway 95, towards Pullman, Washington, the town where Washington State University is located, the place where Brian Kohberger returned home. His phone, it was turned back on about 30 minutes after the attacks. He just continued using it as if nothing had happened, like he just got back from the library. The next morning arrived with no suspicion. The 2 surviving roommates in the basement, they woke up late. One of them came out of her room, saw her friend. Well, she assumed she had just passed out after the party. She called friends. They arrived, they tried to help. They didn't understand. Only when someone went upstairs to the 2nd, 3rd floors, only then did they realize the horror of the situation. Imagine that moment. The call to 911 was only made at 11:58 a.m., almost noon. This 8-hour delay caused endless theories, speculation online, but the investigation later confirmed the girls were in absolute shock. They didn't understand what had actually happened. Police arrived in minutes. What they found in that house, it truly defies description. The photos from the scene were never released, but the reaction of the first responders, it indicates it was a devastating scene, carried out with chilling, inhuman precision. In the beginning, the investigation hit a wall, a total dead end. Everyone was a person of interest. Ex-partners, acquaintances, classmates, dozens of students were interviewed. Every lead was meticulously checked. The victims' families demanded answers. Reporters, TikTok bloggers offered their own, often wild theories. But while this circus was going on, detectives delved into an invisible world, a world of digital breadcrumbs, where the truth hides in signals, in data, cameras, cell phone pings, vehicle movements. Piece by piece, a complex mosaic was coming together. At the center of that mosaic was that white Hyundai Elantra. It became a ghost car, hunted nationwide. Eventually, it turned out, the car was registered to a man named Brian Kohberger. He lived just 15 minutes from the scene. He was a criminology PhD student, teaching criminal justice courses to undergraduates. His appearance, completely unremarkable, didn't draw attention. His behavior, strange, withdrawn. Classmates said he was smart, articulate in theory, but completely detached in everyday life. The perfect profile. He knew how investigations worked. He studied it. But apparently, knowing the theory isn't the same as applying it in practice, especially when you are the person of interest. He didn't know he'd left that microscopic trace of DNA on the sheath. He didn't know a neighbor's camera had captured his car. He didn't know that even though he turned off his phone, its very absence from the network left a mark on the nearby towers. It's called a digital shadow. Most importantly, he didn't know the police were already watching, waiting, ready to move. The arrest. On the morning of December 29th, 2022, thousands of miles away, there was a knock on the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. Brian was arrested without incident. Inside, investigators found gloves, tools, trash bags. In his car, evidence suggesting he had fled the scene. His phone history became a map of guilt. His silence, it was louder than any confession. You have to understand, during all those weeks the investigation was ongoing, the town was paralyzed by fear. The university emptied. Students fled. Classes were canceled. No one knew who did it, why they were still out there. The police were silent. They were silent not because they knew too little, but because they were afraid of revealing too much. One wrong move could spook the man they already felt was hiding in the shadows. The key was the car, that white Hyundai Elantra with no front license plate. It was caught on video multiple times in the early morning of November 13th. It was moving strangely, circling, stopping, disappearing, reappearing. This wasn't a lost driver or a drunk student. This was an observer, a predator. On December 7th, police finally went public with the information about the car. They asked anyone with information to come forward. At that point, they had narrowed the search to over 20,000 vehicles. It seemed impossible, but the digital data started to clear the picture. In Pullman, Washington, a PhD student named Brian Kohberger owned a white Hyundai Elantra, a perfect match for the make, model. His phone records showed erratic routes, late-night drives, signal loss. His phone had pinged near King Road not just on the night of the attacks, but in the 2 months prior, at least 12 more times. He was returning to the scene. Sometimes in the middle of the night, police began surveillance. He was careful, methodical, almost paranoid. He wore gloves to take out his trash. He didn't tell anyone he was driving with his father to Pennsylvania for the holidays. This detail, during their 2,500-mile trip, they were stopped twice, routine traffic stops. Each time, Brian looked nervous, unnatural. The officers had no idea they were standing face to face with the man the entire country was looking for. The surveillance continued through December. The breakthrough in the case came from trash, regular household trash collected from the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville. FBI analysts recovered DNA, a match to the trace found on the knife sheath in Idaho. The probability that it belonged to someone else from the same male lineage? Less than 1 in 100 million. It was enough. The arrest operation began early on the morning of December 29th. The house was quiet. Kohberger offered no resistance. He didn't speak. He just watched. According to the officers present, his eyes were filled with something unreadable. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition.
like he always knew it would end this way. After the arrest, a new battle began, both public, legal. Kohberger was extradited to Idaho. At his first hearing, he entered a plea of not guilty. His face quickly became the media symbol of the incident. The public, of course, was divided. Some demanded the death penalty immediately. Others urged caution. But investigators kept digging. His phone revealed disturbing search data, details of the crime scene, surveillance cameras, court timelines, methods for hiding evidence. He had joined online forums dedicated to serial offenders. He studied Ted Bundy. On his laptop, an academic paper on motivated desensitization, a psychological theory describing how intellectual thought can suppress emotional responses to certain acts. It was left open. He wasn't just contemplating it, he was trying to justify it scientifically. The prosecution built its case on this iron chain of evidence: cell tower data, camera footage, digital records, DNA, behavioral analysis. Even without a confession, the puzzle was complete. The defense, in turn, argued the investigation had tunnel vision, that Kohberger was singled out too early. All subsequent evidence was made to fit him. Kohberger himself remained calm, quiet, neatly dressed. He looked more like a scholar than the alternative. Maybe that's what made him even more disturbing. As the trial process continued, Kaylee Goncalves' family spoke out. Her father addressed the press, his voice breaking, fire in his eyes. He promised not to rest until justice was served, until a death sentence was delivered. The other victims' families supported him, sometimes quietly, sometimes through their grief. They were united on one thing. None of them wanted a compromise. The Kohberger case became a symbol of a new, frightening era of crime. Intellectual, calculated, cold. It raised disturbing questions about the line between studying evil, participating in it. Where does academic interest end? Where does rehearsal begin? He gave lectures on criminal motivation. He became the subject. He talked about behavioral predictability. He became predictable. He studied how to avoid detection. He left traces in almost every corner of the digital world. In the spring of 2024, prosecutors officially announced their intent to seek the death penalty. Their reasoning was direct: the severe nature of the attacks on 4 sleeping college students, the lack of remorse, the immense public impact. This case, it just couldn't end quietly.
This investigation, one of the most complex and high-profile cases in our state's history, was made possible by an extraordinary level of collaboration.
So in July 2025, the most important phase began. The trial, the criminal trial of Bryan Kohberger, started in the summer of 2025, but it didn't happen quickly, to put it mildly. Almost 2.5 years had passed. Imagine that, 2.5 years, filled with grueling legal motions, endless forensic analyses, continuous efforts by the defense to exclude, well, any evidence they possibly could.
Kohberger prepared to plead to these charges
We will examine a second.
because Mr. Kohberger is standing silent. I'm going to enter not guilty plea.
The prosecution held its ground. They were not going to compromise. The language was stark: 4 counts of first-degree murder. The key words, the ones that would determine if he lives, committed with exceptional severity, with premeditation, complete awareness. This wasn't a crime of negligence. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan. The trial took place right there in Latah County, Idaho, in the heart of the community he allegedly shattered. Nearly 100 people went through jury selection. Imagine that process. Finding 12 people who hadn't heard of the case or formed an opinion about it. The courtroom was never empty. It was the biggest show in town. Tragic, but compelling. Spectators, reporters, they took their seats every day like it was a theater premiere. Every hearing immediately hit the headlines. Every look from the defendant, Bryan Kohberger, was analyzed under a microscope. People watched every gesture, every word, trying to see a monster, or maybe a mistake. To some, Kohberger was the obvious person responsible, cold, calculated. To others, he was just an empty vessel, devoid of soul, emotion, remorse. Sometimes it's hard to say which is more disturbing. The prosecution, meanwhile, presented its case with surgical precision. No No emotion, just facts. At the center of those facts were the digital footprints that couldn't be erased. Kohberger's cell phone, his digital shadow. It was turned off exactly during the time of the attacks. What a coincidence, right? Then it magically turned back on when, according to the investigation, he was already driving back to Pullman. Turning off your phone at 4 in the morning, that's evidence in itself in the 21st century. But the cell tower data, obtained before that night, shows he was near the victim's home multiple times during the months leading up to the attacks. He was scouting. Next, the video. Surveillance footage, thankfully neighbors had it, captured that same white Hyundai Elantra driving past the house several times that very night. It was circling like a shark. His route was recorded, reconstructed, confirmed, from the university campus to King Road, then onto Highway 95 heading toward Washington State. But the most critical piece of evidence, the real nail in the coffin for the prosecutors, was the knife sheath found at the scene near one of the victims. A mistake he must have cursed himself for every night. Forensic experts found DNA on it, DNA that belonged to a male genetically related to Brian Kohberger. After comparing that profile to the DNA collected from his parents' trash in Pennsylvania, the match was almost undeniable. The defense, of course, tried to challenge this link. They hinted at possible evidence contamination, at touch DNA transfer, a favorite theory when you're caught, but they couldn't provide any credible evidence for how that could have happened. Then, the court was shown photos of items seized from Kohberger's apartment. It was, essentially, a beginner's kit. Disposable gloves, black face masks, knife sheaths. Of course, the laptop. A laptop with saved articles about criminology, serial offenders. His search history, that's a whole different story. Queries about, well, timelines of decay. How to avoid leaving forensic traces. The most brazen, the news stories about the Idaho investigation, which he viewed after the attacks when, unbeknownst to him, he was already under surveillance. He was watching them look for him. The prosecution's line was clear. This wasn't just a crime, it was a calculated act. He followed his targets. He chose them. He waited. When the time came, he knew who was in which room, how the house was laid out, where to go first. Every detail pointed to intent. The defense strategy, on the other hand, was aimed at just poking holes in that narrative. They couldn't prove he was somewhere else, so they argued that for every piece of evidence, there were alternative, however unlikely, explanations. The phone could have been off for unrelated reasons. The car seen on camera might not be his. The DNA on the sheath? Maybe it was transferred by chance. They clung to what wasn't there. They stressed that no eyewitness ever saw the attacker. That surviving roommate saw only a figure in a mask, but no face. Most importantly, the weapon, the instrument itself, was never found. Kohberger never confessed. The defense wasn't trying to prove innocence. They were trying to create doubt. Just one doubt, enough to break that seemingly perfect case. At one point, the prosecutors brought out their trump card. They presented a giant digital map showing Kohberger's movements for 2 months before the attacks. It was shocking. His car, his phone, appeared near the victim's home at least 12 times. Mostly late at night. These weren't normal student trips. He didn't know the victims personally. He never visited them as a guest. He was observing. Audio recordings were also played in court. After the attacks, Kohberger never mentioned the events in Idaho to anyone. Those who knew him said he became even more withdrawn than usual. He continued to teach, pretending everything was normal, while his anxiety, they say, was noticeably growing. He followed the news, discussed the case in purely academic terms. This duality only amplified the uneasy feeling in the room, like he was in an experiment of his own design, now observing the aftermath. All this time, the victim's parents, they were present for every hearing. Their faces, marked by grief, were a constant, silent reminder.
that behind all these digital maps, these DNA profiles, there were real, stolen lives. Madison's mother wept when photos were shown. Kaylee's father just stared at the defendant, never looking away. A heavy silence hung over the courtroom. It felt as if any breath could tip the scales between truth, terror. By mid-July 2025, after weeks of grueling testimony, the trial reached its final stage. The prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. They cited the nature of the crime, the exceptional severity, the multiple victims, the obvious threat to public safety. This was one of those rare cases where an acquittal seemed unthinkable, a guilty verdict inevitable. Kohberger was silent. His face showed no emotion. He acted calm, as if he'd already accepted the outcome, or like he was watching a movie about someone else. He made no statements. He offered no apology. He showed no remorse. He just waited. The whole nation waited with him. As of right now, the trial is ongoing. The sentencing phase, the final decision on the death penalty, is expected sometime by the end of 2025. But for the victims' families, no sentence, no court decision will bring back what was lost. They are forever left with questions, ones that will probably never be answered. Why these kids? Why in such a way? Why at all? This case became a symbol of pain hidden behind closed doors, a memorial to how one person, consumed by his own darkness, can destroy entire worlds. This isn't just a story about a crime anymore. It's a story about the emptiness that comes after. It's been over 2.5 years since that terrible morning on King Road. The trial of Bryan Kohberger has not yet reached its final stage. The jury continues to deliberate. The prosecution is preparing for the final battle over the sentence. But for the families, the very existence of this trial, it's the culmination of a nightmare from which there is no waking up. On the evening of one of the last hearings, Zana's mother stood before the reporters. She held a photo of her daughter taken just days before the attacks. Zana's smile was bright, genuine, full of life. Every family has dozens of photos like that, now part of memorials. Framed, frozen forever. The names Ethan, Kaylee, Madison, Zana, they are etched into modern American memory. Symbols of innocent lives, taken by an act that had no justification, no understandable motive, no remorse. The prosecutions are convinced of their version. This was not an impulsive act. It wasn't driven by rage or revenge. This was methodical, planned by someone who thought he was smarter than everyone else. He, the criminology PhD student, studied how to avoid capture, created mental simulations, analyzed behavior. Yet, he made a mistake. He left a trace. One tiny thread of DNA on a knife sheath unraveled everything. Kohberger's defense, meanwhile, continues to argue procedural errors, investigative bias, misinterpretation of the evidence. They are preparing appeals, they are filing new motions, but the picture the prosecutors presented to the jury was complete, too logical, too seamless to be a coincidence. He was there. He knew what he was doing. He left, believing the world would never find out. To this day, Bryan Kohberger has never admitted guilt. He has made no public statements, given no interviews, shown no remorse. He just waits.
If it were up to the president, he would have forced this monster to publicly explain why he chose to steal these innocent souls.
In jail, he's kept in isolation under constant watch. He reads, he writes, prepares for the next phase of the legal process. His name is now forever linked to what happened on King Road. Even he can't erase that mark from history. For the small town of Moscow, everything changed. In 2023, the house where it all happened was acquired by the university, then demolished. In its empty place, just some grass, a wooden fence. Students walk by, not looking. It's like a scar, covered by skin that still pulses underneath. Life has resumed. The university is breathing again, but the fear, it just lives deeper now.
This will ensure that this evil will never again terrorize a family as he did ours and 3 others. Trial would have involved risks.
It's almost been 3 years, and today's the end of a long, hard-fought battle.
This story shows us the most frightening evil isn't impulsive rage. It's cold, academic calculation. When a person literally studies the act as a science, they stop being human. They become a monster, just waiting for the right moment, thinking they're smarter than everyone else. Now, tell us honestly, what shocked you more? The terrible attack on 4 students in their sleep? Or the fact the surviving roommate saw the attacker in a mask? She just locked her door. Could you imagine yourself in her place? Or do you judge her for not calling the police right away, but waiting 8 hours? What about Brian himself? The fact he's a criminology PhD student who studied these crimes? Does it make his actions even more repugnant? Or is it just a tragic irony? Who's worse, someone who acts in a fit of rage, or someone who studies it like a science to do it perfectly? If you've dealt with anything like this in your own life, tell us about it. We're all here to listen, to support one another. If this story affected you, subscribe so you don't miss the next case, one that might shock you even more. May Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle rest in peace. The Old Testament says, "He who digs a pit for another will fall into it himself." This story proves that. Take this as a warning. A mind without a conscience is the most dangerous weapon in the world. Never think you're smarter than everyone, especially when it comes to these kinds of acts, because there's always one small thing, one trace of DNA on a sheath that will give you away. Now look at the screen. You see the next videos we've prepared for you. Believe us, we worked just as hard on those. If this case about the perfect crime shocked you, the next one will top anything you've seen. So we're not saying goodbye. God bless you. See you over there.